what is the common view within economic profession and central banks of the relationship between interest rates and economic growth?
Yes, thank you very much. And thanks for actually raising this topic. I mean, it is very central and fundamental to economics and monetary policy, but for some reason, people don't really talk about it much. So I'm glad you're raising it. Now, yes, so in answer to your question, economists famously disagree a lot. There's different schools of thought, different approaches, different opinions, economists always arguing, and all seems very confusing. However, there seems to be one issue on which essentially all schools of thought agree, which is quite, interesting. That's fantastic. Namely, the question of the relationship between interest rates and economic growth. And you can go back to classical economists, when modern economics started in England, Britain, at the time, the leading economic, military, and political power in the world, and also producing what then became henceforth the mainstream approach in later modern versions, but it started all with classical economics, David Hume, David Ricardo, and others. And they already proposed this relationship, namely lower interest rates lead to higher economic growth, and higher interest rates slow economic growth. And there's various reasons for that. The most obvious one being with lower rates, investment gets attractive, more investment will be stimulated. For instance, you can look at capital budgeting methods, discounting net present value calculations. So with lower interest rates, more projects become viable, you get more investment, you get more economic growth. They all talk about equilibrium and demand equals supply, market forces, making sure that things are in equilibrium. And in equilibrium, prices are more important than quantities, because it's the prices that move to give us the equilibrium. And of course, the overarching price for the economy is the price of money, the interest rate. And therefore, it's quite logical in this equilibrium economics, from classical to neoclassical to new classical and modern day economics, that it's all about the price of money, the interest rate being the key variable. And so quite naturally, central banks, of course, have been reiterating this for decades and almost on a daily basis. Even now, when they have quantitative policies, they still say, oh, we may need to lower rates even into negative territory, say the Fed, or in the UK, this is being discussed, should we lower rates to negative territory, because lower rates stimulate the economy, and surely we want to stimulate the economy. And of course, central banks are the biggest employers of economists in the world, employing thousands and thousands of economists, and they produce research. And since this is a very central, fundamental pillar of what central banks claim to be doing, you can expect that there are just hundreds and hundreds of studies. And even if there's no recent studies, maybe at some stage this has been so solidly empirically demonstrated that that it's therefore being proclaimed as the law and the prophets in economics. However, the surprise is that when you actually search for such studies, you don't seem to be able to find them. I had already noticed when I was a student that when I looked at empirical papers, research published in journal articles, usually on various different topics, that whenever the role of interest rates came into play as one of the many variables in a model, sometimes there was, well, several times I noticed there's a footnote saying, oh, interest rates behaved surprisingly, or they didn't really behave well. They didn't conform to our theories, or we didn't quite get the result on interest rates that we expected. And it was sort of hidden in a footnote. But I noticed it over the years again and again. And of course, that got me thinking, and I started already in the 1990s to look at the empirical facts. Now, I didn't conduct a very thorough, detailed, systematic, long-term empirical study, but I just looked at the data, interest rates on the one hand, and economic growth, and it really looked like the theory was not correct. And it looked like reality is different from what we're being told. So there were these, indications already, and there were bits and pieces of knowledge out there indicating, oh, there's something maybe wrong here. But because, I think because it's such a fundamental relationship, that's not only fundamental for as the foundation of modern central banking, but also of modern economics per se, it seemed to me nobody dared to tackle this systematically. And I think people were afraid this is too sensitive. The theories say, well, rates have an effect on growth. Therefore, there's a causation running from interest rates to economic growth. So we're testing for these two dimensions, the correlation and the causation. And the expectation, according to the mainstream theories, is all of these theories should be a negative correlation, and causation should run significantly from interest rates to economic growth. So that was what we were testing. And in a nutshell, the finding is that the correlation is not negative, it is positive. So interest rates and economic growth are positively correlated. And we found that there's far more evidence of the causation to run from economic growth to interest rates than the other way around. In other words, our empirical finding is the opposite of these theories in both dimensions. So instead of the expectation and the claim that lower rates lead to higher growth, higher rates lead to lower growth, what we found is empirical evidence for the following relationship: higher growth leads to higher rates, lower growth leads to lower rates. That's what the empirical data seems to suggest.